It's easy for some to say, well, they don't worry about the money because they're a billionaire. No. Regardless of their business type, it doesn't matter. This is the formula.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So today's guest has bought and sold countless companies over the years. And some of them have been small business. Others of his investments have gone as high as 200 million. Guy knows his stuff. He's not somebody who just teaches somebody how to buy a business. He's actually doing this stuff. He's worked for people. I probably can't actually give you their names. He's worked in family offices for people that, well, if I said the name, you'd know right off the bat. Brilliant man. So we had a conversation the other day, and I said to him, you know what? I got to get you on the podcast because it's really more than just buying a business too. A lot of people, they build businesses and they're not saleable, and they want to at some point be able to exit. Even if you're thinking, Charlie, hey man, I love what I'm doing. I really have no interest in selling it right now. Freedom has a lot to do with having options. And you want to have the options when somebody comes knocking on the door to say, hey, I'd like to buy your business, that you have the option to go ahead and do it. And some of the best sales that I've seen to date happen when you least expect it to happen. And if your business isn't saleable, that's the difference between being rich and then being wealthy. And we've had several clients at Predictable Profits that have walked away with generational wealth through liquidation events because they built their business using the primary drivers necessary for maximum wealth. For a lot of companies, they think, oh, the best I can do is a multiple off of EBITDA, but there are many situations we can get multiples off of revenue too, even if you are B2B service-based business or agency or so forth. Be surprised. My guest has done this over and over again. He's worked with thousands of people over the years. Richard Parker, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. Your introduction is terrific. There's a lot of value, which is great. So I'm really looking forward to this show.
Yeah, well, you're a humble man, especially when you look at the track record that you've had and the people that you've worked with in the past. I think part of that is because, my guess, you're not doing it for money anymore. You're doing it because you just really enjoy what it is that you do. And if you just sat there on the beach in Florida with a margarita in your hand, you get bored over time. So now it's about like, you want to stay in the game. And I think it's just part of loving what you do.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. I would be sitting with an old fashioned. I'm not a tequila drinker, but outside of that, you've got everything correct.
No, that's something else you and I have in common for sure.
I've been testing making the ultimate old fashioned. I've been doing it for about 2 months. So I'm trying different recipes like every couple of nights. I'm not a big drinker at all. If I go for dinner, once out of 10 times I'll have something to drink, but I love old fashions. So I've been buying it. I've been trying different concoctions. Now I'm narrowing it down. So hopefully when we get to meet in person, I'll give you the latest and greatest. I'm doing all the research till you get here, and then you can have the perfect one.
Well, I'll tell you, up until recently, I would have taken you up on that, but I actually decided I was going to go dry for the rest of the year.
Good for you.
Yeah. I've never really been a big drinker, but I've been focusing a lot more on my health. Like all of us, we get paid in direct proportion to our ability to think. And one of my clients challenged me to go dry along with him. And I said, you know what? I'll go ahead and do it. So, I have this other company. I don't know if we've ever talked about it, Founders Fuel. So I have a number of different companies. This is one of them. But this right here just takes the edge off, reduces the stress, and actually creates a little bit more drive. So actually, it's been easy for me to go dry, because I don't want this feeling to go away when I'm on Founders Fuel. So it's just been a lot easier for me to go dry. But
I
miss a good Negroni here and there, though.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Like for me, if someone told me I could never have an alcoholic drink again in my life, it wouldn't even faze me. Like I might have a dozen during the course of the year, but I do have one. I like a really good old fashioned. So, well, good for you. And you're an energetic guy, so I'm sure you don't need a whole lot of fuel.
Well, I try.
Okay.
Let's talk about companies though, right? There's actually two sides of the equation. A lot of people don't realize that buying a business is a growth strategy in and of itself. And they also don't realize the way that the math works. If you buy one, so as you get to know me, you'll know I have interest in a lot of different companies. I also have a commercial portfolio of real estate and so forth. And, when you buy real estate, you buy it and it says, all right, The income from the real estate has to satisfy the debt load. And then there's got to be a little left over for me. When you buy a business, you buy the business. The income from the business, the profits from the business have to be able to cover the debt load. They also have to be able to cover management, including a CEO. So you buy a business, ultimately you're giving yourself a salary on top of it. But then the
Yeah.
coolest thing is if your multiple is bigger and you acquire a business, there's this awesome amount of arbitrage when you can buy a business at a lower multiple, absorb it into your own entity that has a higher multiple, and then day one, it's like, boom, you've just got this incredible return automatically.
Yeah, I mean, it's, they look at it, and the term that they use is accretion, right? Which is the oldest methodology of how public companies make acquisitions. Just as to put it in the simplest terms for listeners, for public companies, a public company, let's say as an example, is trading at 10 times earnings.
Yeah.
Well, if they buy a company at anything below 10 times earnings and they fold it in, it's immediately worth more.
Isn't that amazing?
Because now in the aggregate, the existing business plus this business that they've acquired now have a greater amount of profit in combined, and now it's trading at 10 times. So overnight, the business that you just bought is worth more. So you could buy it on a Monday for 9 times and sell it on a Tuesday for 10. And in a smaller business, the difference where people have trouble grasping this is there's not the liquidity in a privately held business like you have in a publicly traded company that we just used as an example. However, the strategy holds true. So in other words, if you have plans at some point to sell your business, which ultimately, the vast majority of business owners do, whether they're going to sell it to family or to a stranger, if you build the business, organic growth is really satisfying, but buying and growing through acquisition is much easier. Organic growth is tough. So if you look at it the same way, like those public companies, and say, hey, I'm in the HVAC business, or I'm in the, window washing business, or whatever it may be, or I own a dry cleaner. Well, if I could ultimately sell it at 4, 5, or whatever X times, and I can acquire another business that fits into my business at a lower multiple, I immediately have value in my business, more value than I did the day before.
Yeah.
And growth through acquisition is much easier than people believe. And it's much easier to grow your business that way than organically. I mean, it's not even close.
Well, let's think about this for a minute, right? Because what I want our listeners to do is just open up their imagination to the possibility. So we're not even talking about, let's say you buy a business for a few million and now you just have that increase in valuation. There's even a step that even goes beyond that. So if you're going to run paid advertising to acquire clients, and let's say you're in the agency business or whatnot, it's not uncommon to, $200 for, for a qualified lead. That's not uncommon for those type of numbers. And then, you bring in all these leads and you run the numbers and so forth, and you could pay to acquire clients, and then you have a conversion rate. And I mean, there's a lot of agencies that will cost them as much as $2,000 to actually get a converted client.
Right.
Right. So it's
Right.
$2,000 per converted client. Then, of course, you got to be able to satisfy the demands. And so you got to make sure you have enough people and systems and processes and the whole deal. So when you're acquiring a business, there's other assets and opportunities that we look at, and we'll say, okay, wait a minute, who's figured out some profit centers that I haven't figured out yet? So who's figured out different funnels and marketing campaigns and so forth that are working consistently? So, okay, good. So I'm getting some IP. I'm acquiring IP that saves me the time, the burden of trying to test and all that other stuff. Boom. Okay, awesome. Got that. That becomes now mine. But wait a minute, they have how many leads and how many paying clients? So by acquiring them, is my business complementary to the things that they want and need? So now all of a sudden, instead of spending $2,000 for a sale, now you're acquiring a bunch of people and you have a complementary service that then allows you to then multiply your existing business, your existing lifetime customer value, and so forth. So you get the IP, you get all these, other different businesses and whatnot. And then do they have systems and complementary products and services that you can sell your existing database over to what they're doing? So now, again, it gives you another opportunity to multiply. So when you actually put it down on paper and you say, wait a minute here, wait a minute here. This is more than just I'm acquiring a business and I get to get revenue from what they're doing. It's like you're increasing your lifetime value. You're increasing their customer lifetime value. You're have that ability to cross-pollinate client bases and leads, across the board to bring in more customers. You think about those numbers and it has a geometric benefit, like a massive geometric
Yes.
benefit. Like there's a reason, founders fuel, there's a reason why I didn't create a mass market product out there that just goes anywhere. That doesn't serve me. I work with, top 6, 7, 8, 9-figure CEOs. This market cross pollinates with my existing market and so forth.
Right. So the one thing that you touched on in it, and the example of, cost per acquisition and leads and buying another company that's generating leads, I want to extrapolate that example so that anybody listening who owns a business understands that that's not specific to leads or advertising. That example you gave is just an example of an application that you can have for any business, regardless of the type of business. And here's the underlying fundamentals to all of this, which I've used repeatedly to grow my businesses. You have a business, regardless of what it is. I don't even want to talk about the ads or the leads or whatever, because this is so generic and this is such a proven formula that anybody who owns a business can do this, regardless of their business type. To think of it this way: you have a business and you have a client base, whether those clients are B2B clients, B2C clients, recurring clients, reoccurring clients, one-time clients, it doesn't matter. This is the formula the way you look at it. You have to figure out how to get more stuff to sell to that same client base.
Yeah.
If you have a client base, you have a dry cleaner down the road and small business, and you have regular customers that come in. Well, there's other services that you can sell them: tailoring, repairs, alterations, shoe repair, and it's almost endless. Because those people are homeowners, you can actually try to figure out, can you do pool service? Can you do home cleaning? You have this client base. So when the example that you gave, your listeners need to apply that thinking to any type of business. Now, the integration of a competitor, so there's two parts. There's ancillary businesses, right? And then there's competitive businesses. So competitive businesses are like the example you gave. They're doing similar or the exact same thing. So how do you make like 1 + 1 = wow,
Yeah.
right? They're getting the two together. But there's also ancillary businesses that complement your business and are additional services or products that you can sell to the same existing client base. And those methods of growing your business, that is a lot easier than going out and trying to get a new customer.
Yeah. So let's use an example just so we can illustrate this to everybody else. A lot of our listeners, they just happen to be marketing agencies. So let's use an example of, okay, somebody's a marketing agency. Let's say they sell SEO services. They sell SEO services. They go, Richard, Charlie, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, but I don't see it. How do I make this work for my business?
So how do you make that application? Okay, so the first thing is you determine you're selling SEO services, and let's make to extrapolate out the examples, you're selling them to businesses as opposed to individuals. You're selling them to businesses in certain areas, but a wide swath of businesses. You're not specializing in anything, so we're going to make it as generic as possible. Well, those same SEO companies need other forms of digital marketing. They may need website building. They may need a better social media presence. They may need, for example, something as specific as YouTube expertise. So companies that sell SEO, it's typically related to their website. They're doing articles. They're trying to move up in the Google rankings, that type of stuff. But there's also services, digital marketing services that go way beyond SEO. So you could be a Facebook specialist. You could be an Instagram specialist. You could be a YouTube specialist as far as those videos are concerned. You could provide social media services. Now, there are companies, for example, I'm using one particular example so timely because we just hired a company that does nothing but YouTube video optimization and marketing. Now, you take that, any and every, I would venture to guess, I don't want to say everyone because that doesn't give me any margin for error, but I'm going to say 95% of those SEO customers that you use as your example, they're making YouTube videos.
Yeah, I mean, well, actually, they should be. If they're
They should
not, they
be,
should
right.
be. Yeah.
Yeah, I know you were going to say you would think. I just want to let you know I gave up using that terminology because I stopped thinking for other people because it's all. But yes, so if they're not, they should be. But that is definitely a market. So you could take that company that does nothing but YouTube and you drop that business into yours now because it's so specific. It probably doesn't garner a high multiple because there's only so many people that could buy that type of business. So you likely could buy that business at a real low multiple, right? Because the market to sell a YouTube specialist is pretty slim. So when it's pretty slim, unless they're doing massive volume and making massive amount of money, the multiples are low because there's not a big buyer pool. It's demand, supply and demand. So you could buy that at a lower multiple, immediately drop it in, and every email, every contact, every phone call, every flyer, whatever it is that you do to market your SEO services, you now have an, oh, by the way, we also have YouTube optimization services. Now, your hit rate by default is going to be pretty good because it's all bonus money. So there's a perfect example. So you have YouTube. You also have other types of digital marketing that may make sense. And there could be some things like website design.
Yeah.
So, yes, you hired us to do your SEO, but I got bad news for you, Charlie. You hired us to do your SEO, but your website is shit. Okay. So we need, okay, like that's the good news is we can help you. The bad news is we need a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so we need to redesign your website for the SEO to work. We can do all the SEO, but people coming to the website, they're not going to buy. I mean, they're really not going to buy. We could get you, improve your rankings, but we need to polish up your website. We need it to convert better. We also need to better measure the metrics. So, hey, we've got a company that does nothing but metric measurement. There's another company you could buy, and we will you pay us on a monthly basis. We take all the SEO that we've done, all the YouTube videos, everything that we've done, and we crunch all those numbers and tell you, here's where we need to pivot, or here's where we need to improve, here's where we need to stop spending money, etc. So there's another business. So there's, we can spend this, I don't know how long we have for this call, but we could layer on probably 10 companies that SEO business can acquire and immediately implement.
So when you think about it, you also talked about, they have companies that might have a lower multiple. So I want to give people an idea of different things to look at when you're analyzing a company, especially if you're going to buy a small business that will lower their multiple. And as I say this, I also, on the flip side, if this is what lowers their multiple, this is what you need to do to increase your multiple as well. And you and I spoke about this earlier. So, the first one would be, do they have a unique advantage? Now, for a lot of these companies, they're very commoditized. They compete by saying we offer better service, we have a better price, we have this, we have that. It's the same stuff that everybody else has, but there's not enough that is unique. It's not a unique advantage. So in and of itself, that is a discount.
Yes.
Is it CEO or founder dependent? If it's CEO or founder dependent, massive just punch in the face when it comes to lower valuation.
Absolutely.
So again, if you're able to come in, you see it's very CEO dependent, you're going to have to extract founder knowledge, build systems and processes around it, empower people, but that you're buying at a discount. The other one is going to be, are they able to generate leads and sales beyond word of mouth and referrals? Now, I will say, when I look at business opportunities, if everything is predicated upon word of mouth and referrals, it actually takes me a lot to make a decision to buy a business that would be word of mouth and referrals, because so much of that is going to be tied to the founder network. So, that would be the one thing for me. If it's just based on word of mouth and referrals, unless they have a huge reputation in the marketplace, and they just have a lot of momentum due to the business. I don't know about you, Richard. For me, if it's all word of mouth and referrals tied to the CEO in the network, that's usually a hard pass for me.
Hey, if you're listening to the Beyond Seven Figures podcast, you may already have a great business and you've cracked that elusive 7-figure mark. But let's be honest, building a business is one thing, but scaling it to true, lasting profitability is a whole other ballgame. That's why I'm excited to share something special with you. It's the Predictable Profits Playbook written by Charles Gourdette. So go now to beyond7figures.com.
Yeah, I mean, I read something recently where the conversion rate actually for word of mouth referrals is actually really low, surprisingly enough. Like there was, I don't know how valid the data was, but it was an interesting article the way they painted it. And yes, I agree with you because word of mouth is not a machine. It's not, you can't duplicate it.
Right. Yep.
And that's it. I mean, so that alone, the fact that you can't duplicate it means whether you want to try to duplicate it in your own business or expand geographically, if you can't duplicate it, it's not worth a whole lot.
You're right. So we're definitely on the same page there. I think more and more you and I talk, the more and more I feel we're in alignment. Then
Correct.
the other one is recurring revenue. Now, a lot of companies are going to be project based. A lot of companies that focus on one-time purchases and whatnot. That's really does lower the multiple. It's almost a sure way of getting a multiple off of EBITDA instead of revenue. But ideally, I like to move in there, and if we can create at least 50% of the revenue, monthly recurring or annual recurring, huge, huge, huge. It's probably one of the biggest.
Correct.
Opportunities.
One of the things that an offshoot of that is people should also think about, reoccurring revenue. I can't even tell you how many
Yeah.
businesses I've gone in and they tell me they have recurring revenue when it's actually reoccurring revenue, which is a huge difference. Recurring is it's almost month to month guaranteed or annually guaranteed renewals, right? You have an attrition rate, but you have a demonstrative renewal rate. Whereas reoccurring is, and you see that more in B2B type businesses where, you work on a project for a client and then, 18 months later, there's another project. And another 18 months later or 12 months later, there's another project. So over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, you've done X number of projects for Y number of clients that have reoccurred. Now, reoccurring revenue is still valuable. It's nowhere near as valuable as recurring revenue, but reoccurring is important. And business owners make a mistake. Well, if we get potentially into the, things you could do to improve the multiples, is being able to demonstrate that. Because very often business owners, will sit down with a prospective buyer and they don't even realize that they have reoccurring revenue. There is value to it.
Yeah.
It's just not as valuable as recurring, but there is value.
I agree. Well, here's the difference, right? Reoccurring, let's just take a simple one that everybody can relate to. Say a barbershop. Reoccurring is, okay, I have somebody that comes in and then they usually come in, every 3 to 4 to 5 weeks. And they get it, but sometimes they miss and, and so forth. And so you take an average client that, should be buying from you maybe 16 times over the course of a year, but just because life gets in the way, maybe they only end up buying maybe about 11 times. But that's reoccurring. And that is still does really well, but it's not predictable. You don't have a guarantee that they're going to come back. Versus recurring. And there are several barbershops that have really picked up on this now. They go, look, we know they got to come in. So why don't we do this? We'll put them on a subscription, guarantee that, they're going to be able to come in and get their haircut. They'll get a slight discount off of everybody that just comes in once a month. And we'll give them an extra service. Like we'll give them like a shoulder rub or something as a result. That's, super high margin and, seen as high value. It only takes maybe 2 minutes extra. But that's recurring. But the difference in the valuation is night and day.
It's massive. And what they can do to take it a step further is in the subscription-based model that you cite as an example. The key is for the owner to be able to extrapolate those metrics for a prospective buyer, to be able to say, yes, we have subscription-based business. Here's what we know to be our attrition rate. So you're going to have a certain amount of people that they're going to do the exercise. They bought the subscription, realize, hey, it's not worth it, or they've moved out of the area, or for whatever reason, that every 12 months you lose X number of people. As long as you can prove that, but it's not critical whether that number is 60% renewal or 90. Yes, 90 is better than 60. But the fact that you could demonstrate that there's a 60% renewal, someone looking at that business and says, hey, every month when I step into this place, I know I could just sit down and here's how much money is going to come in. So now you work and say, okay, how do I get that 60, raise that or whatever? But the point being is having that measurement and knowing what that number is critically important, and you brought up some very good points like owner centric, all these type of things. I have 4 bumper stickers of that side, which weighs, like increases or decreases the value, which is, running your business like you have to sell it. So people who could walk in can understand the business. They're proper books and records, great financials. You want to have those, irrespective of the size of the business. What keeps you up at night about the business? Because in the eyes of a buyer, whatever keeps you up at night is going to multiply by the power of 10 to someone who doesn't know your business. So if it's customer concentration, and even if it's something that you live with and you're comfortable with, every business owner has stuff that keeps them up at night at business. Even if you have, for example, a commercial cleaning business, well, recruiting, training, and retaining staff keeps you up at night about that business, every business. So not only are those issues going to become issues for the buyer, if you can solve them now, it makes your business a better business. And the third one is what you talked about earlier, which is, my bumper sticker is what happens if you get hit by a Pepsi truck? Like, does the business survive? Do you have processes, procedures, system, which is, to your point of owner-centric businesses. And one of the things, it was actually when you and I spoke the last time, I started thinking about this further, because there was a fourth one that I was thinking about that goes back many, many years to a guy I was doing some work with, and I met this consultant. His name is Tony Romano, but brilliant guy. He was a UPS executive for many years and a good buddy of mine. And he used to have this expression, which was, whatever gets measured gets done. And, I've always had these 3 bumper stickers, and I'd say, I think it was actually after when we spoke the last time, I said, that's really a fourth important bumper sticker, because it also adds value to the business. And example, this measuring the metrics. It's like whatever gets measured in business, it's almost like the numbers version of accountability, right? Yeah. So those are all things that on both sides, to all your points, which is they either increase or decrease the value.
For sure.
And the multiple.
And you actually said the last 2, right? So we talked about having a unique advantage, founder independence, then multiple different sources of revenue. That would be third. Then a strong MRR or ARR. Then the one that you just mentioned was a churn rate. So you want a churn rate below 5%, or the other way to look at it, retention rate above 95%. That's measured monthly. And then you said the other one too, which is data intelligence, right? Being able to know all the numbers. But that goes more than just, okay, here's our revenue and profit.
Oh, no, it's way deeper.
Way deeper. Like you said, what is their churn, lifetime customer value, and so forth. But it even goes deeper than that. A lot of times when our clients are going through liquidation events, the PE firms want to talk with me, because just being the business coach, they want to get different perspective, but inevitably they all say the same thing. And they're like, this is the easiest due diligence that we've ever had to do, because, one of the t-shirts that I have is results, and we make database decisions. And they're like, and this last one that we just did. So I'm curious, like, what was it specifically that made this the easiest? And she said, Charlie, not only did you guys have all the metrics, every employee had a KPI assigned to them. So we could tell who's in the right seat, who are not in the right seat. And like everything was just so smooth. But the benefit of having a due diligence process that's so easy, the level of confidence that they had in the leader when making this acquisition was so much greater. So they were actually more comfortable making a bigger offer to them because there was less guesswork.
Absolutely.
They're like,
makes perfect sense.
This guy's got his shit together.
Makes perfect sense. And when you think of things in context or contrast, right? Anybody making acquisitions on a regular basis sees way too many businesses that are just a plate of spaghetti. And so when you come across something that is really, crisp and clean, and they have good answers, that changed the whole perception of not only the buyer, the way they look at the owner, but the way they look at the business. Right. When you come across, if you're looking to acquire a business and you go in, one of the biggest questions prospective buyers forget to ask business owners when they go in the first time is, how's business? Right? I mean, it's sort of stupid, but they forget to ask that. And when you ask that question, you get 2 types of answers. One is the descriptive, business is good, or business is okay, or business is bad. That's one answer. And you compare and contrast that to the answer when you say, hey, Charlie, how's business? And you say, business is really, really good. We're up 6.9% this month. Overall year to date, we're up 4.7%, but our margins have gone from 37.4 to 42.6. And our attrition rate, or our fall off rate, has declined by over 10%. So we're now have a renewal rate of 84.7 versus what we had before, 79, whatever the number is. Now, if I ask a question to you and I get either one of those two answers, as a buyer, who are you going to feel more comfortable with? You're going to feel more comfortable with scenario B. This person has got tremendous understanding of their business. They know what's going on. So knowing those metrics and I just always look at them as they're the numbers version of accountability.
Yeah.
And it's very important as it relates to sales staff. When you're talking about, going in and not only the employees have those KPIs, very often when you go into due diligence, they don't have those KPIs, but it's especially important related to a sales team or business development team because they're salespeople by nature. So they can't shut up, number one. And number two, they usually don't have proper metrics. It's like, I remember, one business had a pretty large sales team. And I used to say to one guy, "Hey, Scott, how are things going?" And he used to say either good, great, or terrible. And I used to say, "What does that mean?" Like, I don't know what either one of those means because we all have different versions of what good means, what terrible means, what great means, etc. And he used to say, "Tell me how many new orders you got today." And then we actually ended up moving it and compensation related to, if you don't have those proper metrics defined, you actually compensate people incorrectly as well. So you can compensate them based on, KPIs and specific measurement, and then everybody knows where they stand at all times. It's like there's no gray matter.
Here's the interesting thing. And, let's say that you wanted to fly a plane. Well, if you're going to fly a plane and you're just getting your pilot's license and you get this little Cessna and you go up in the air and whatnot, for the most part, you can do this without instruments. You can look to the left and the right in front of you. You can see what's going on. You have clear line of sight. As long as it's, long as you're flying during the day, perfect weather and so forth. Like, you for the most part, you could do it without instruments. The moment you start moving faster and the moment you start moving in different weather conditions, let's say all of a sudden the fog rolls in, which that would be the equivalent of a different economic condition, right? Or it gets dark, in even just speed alone, right?
Windy, whatever.
Right. Speed alone can either accelerate greatness or can accelerate weakness. The moment any of that happens, pilots become very, very dependent on the instruments.
Right.
In fact, they don't even trust what they see out their windows. They trust more what's going on within their data in their dials. As a small business owner, we start from scratch and we fly that Cessna. And we're so used to looking over our shoulder, left and right, that we feel totally comfortable with making decisions based on what we see. As the companies begin to grow faster, they hit that 500,000, $1 million mark. They're already moving fast. When they're at that $1 million mark, they're already starting to move fast. Any clouds coming in, and you lose line of sight when you have more employees, and suddenly you can't interact with every customer and every lead and have every sales conversation. You lose that line of sight. Yet they don't have these dials. They're still trying to look out the window and see what's happening. And the result of that is they inadvertently miss tons and tons of opportunity. They inadvertently are getting more, there's expenses and so forth that they're overlooking. There's a whole nightmare of messes that, it's one of the first things that we do when clients work with us right off the bat. Let's get your data cleaned. And as soon as they get their data cleaned, as soon as they have it, it's like the light turns on in the office for the first time. And if they did nothing else and get their data cleaned, almost immediately they begin to see revenue increases and profit increases. Because it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was an issue. Right. We had a simple example. I worked with this agency and he did SEO, he did pay-per-click, and he did website design, 3 core services. As we began to clear his data and we looked at the margins between all those services, for 10 years, he sold website services. For 10 years, he didn't realize it, but every time he sold a website, he was actually losing money on the website.
No surprise.
Losing money. He would have been better off not selling websites because he lost money every time he sold one.
Yeah, no surprise. I mean, I've had it. There's a couple of really important points there. And to the last one, I've had scenarios where I've looked at companies where they have a high degree of customer concentration. So in other words, call it a business doing $5 million in revenue, and they have one customer represents 20% of their business, $1 million. And I looked at that business, and no buyer is acquiring that business, or the multiple, or they're putting in massive earnouts, or they just can't get anybody comfortable with buying the business. And I dig into these numbers and I look and say, you know what? Like that buyer, but that client, like they're not even profitable. They're just providing top line numbers, but they're so important in the eyes of the owner that they're giving them all these freebies or additional services or products or whatever, or reducing the price. They're not even that profitable. I'm better off to fire that customer, alleviate my whole team of spending all this energy working with this one customer who, whenever they call, everybody jumps, and saying, you know what, I'm better off to allocate those resources, the human capital. In the example that you're looking at, I'm not surprised at all that this guy is selling websites and losing money, because it ties into a bigger point, which is, and you mentioned this very early on, and I'm not going through who, have been my clients over the years and who I've been partners with or whatever, but I've had some clients that are, ridiculously wealthy individuals and partners and what have you. And what I've noticed with the people that are uber successful, I'm not talking about the guy who's a millionaire. I'm talking about the guy or the gal who's a billionaire. They have a very different mindset, which can trickle down to small business owners. They collectively look at business and not worry about the money. Now, it's easy for some to say, well, they don't worry about the money because they're a billionaire. No. When you go back in time, even ones that I've seen that have gone to extraordinary status, from a small business to building $100 or $200 million company, they don't focus on the money. So their goal is, they almost subconsciously say to themselves, I am going to build a great business by doing the following, empowering employees, developing great product, whatever those bullets are. Because the application of that to people who are listening that may be your clients or smaller businesses is the following. Here's where they go off the reservation. In the example that you gave, going 500,000 to $1 million or 2 million. You start off a business, or you buy a small business, and you're scraping out 50 grand a year, barely keeping one nostril above the water. You start doing a couple things, and the business is now throwing off 100 grand or 150. Now you're doing better, and you're getting more clients, and now you're making 250 a grand, 250 a year. Here's what's happened in that trajectory. At the beginning, you had one nostril above the water. You're paying your bills off of 50 grand. Now you're making 150. Now you're taking out 150, and you adjust your lifestyle. Now the business is making 250, and now you're taking out all the money, and you have a $250,000 a year lifestyle. Well, the reality is, you have to discipline yourself to live on that $150,000 lifestyle, or 100, and you take that extra $100,000 and you plow it into the business, because that is going to grow the business. And if a business sells at a multiple, for example, 4 or 5 times in a smaller business, for every dollar of value that you add, you're getting $4 or $5 out. So they go off the reservation because they just keep adjusting their own lifestyle, and they don't invest in people. They don't invest in systems. They don't invest in processes. And so they're stuck with the business that's completely owner centric. And it gets back to, probably the biggest thing that you encounter with your clients, which is, if they get hit by a Pepsi truck, or at 5 o'clock at night, the assets of the business leave. And that's not worth a whole lot.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I know we're pushing up against the clock. I'm going to ask you my favorite question to ask our guests. This is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. What is your best tip for our listeners that want to take their business beyond 7 figures?
Hire great people and empower them to do their job.
Explain that a little more.
When I was a young business owner, 29 years old, my ego and insecurity got in the way because I was a very young business owner, 29. And probably layer on there with ego, I was probably too worried about being right as opposed to doing right. When I finally got to the point of starting to hire people that were bigger, better, and faster than me, didn't kiss my ass, weren't yes people, but they were really good at what they did, much better than I was at what they were doing. My business took a quantum leap. And I realized, you know what? I have to hire people that are much smarter than me and let them do their job. And if they screw it up, I find someone else, but empower them. It goes back to what I mentioned earlier, which is this idea of I'm going to build a great business. Because if you do, the money happens by default. And it also ties into that adjusting your lifestyle or not, put money back into the business. If you hire great people and let them do their job, don't tell them how to do their job, because the reason why you hire great people and pay them more is for what they bring to the table. So let them do their job, empower them to do their job, and your business will grow. I mean, it will explode. To me, it's a massive part of it, because if not, you're always burdened with doing everything yourself. You can't take a vacation. You micromanage the business. Your people don't feel like they're part of the equation. Even if they're good at what they do, you keep cutting them off at the knees, and eventually they just go into cruise control and show up and do their job just to do their job. Versus, compare and contrast it to saying, I'm going to hire someone who's 10 times smarter than me in this particular area. I'm going to pay them well. I'm going to give them an opportunity to make even more money than I do, if that's, if it makes sense economically, as long as they hit certain metrics, and I'm going to let them go. So to me, every big business started as a small business.
You're absolutely right. We just had this discussion in our board of directors client meeting, and people don't realize that if you look at an A player, you can invest in an A player and you could get maybe a 10-to-1 ROI thereabouts on an A player, right? The amount of time that you need to invest in this A player is minimum, because it's, this particular person is going to come to you with ideas. They're going to be smarter than you, fulfilling that particular role. They're going to share ideas that you didn't know about. It's going to be great. It's a wonderful type of relationship. B players, you get a 2 to 4 times, ROI. They require a bit more management, a bit more hand-holding and so forth. They can oftentimes grow into an A player, but it does require more. Sometimes it's all we can afford at B players, so we're going to be fine with that. Then we go to a C player, and this is where a lot of small businesses get stuck, because it's like, well, I only want to spend this amount of money, but I'm going to try to get them to do everything that I can imagine. The C player requires a ton of hand-holding. They don't tend to stick around long in the company, because if anything, it's either break even. So we're spending this money and this is all we're getting back is break even, or they end up losing a little more, because you put time on a time value on your amount of time, all the things that you're doing to try to do it, the lost opportunities or the lost client deals or higher churn rate because they're not doing their job the right way, becomes a colossal mess. And then when you look at subcontractors, you can get A, B, and C player subcontractors, but subcontractors have a different mindset.
They have a totally different mindset. And yes, you're absolutely correct. I think what dovetails on that with smaller businesses, when you start getting to those B and C players where small business owners really make a big mistake, is one thing I tell them is, don't let your loyalty bankrupt your business. If you have someone who's not right, you're an employee, you know what? Get rid of them, because what you probably get at the beginning is as good as it's going to get. If you're very lucky, it's going to stay at that level. Chances are it's going to decline. So if it doesn't work out, if it's not the right person, don't try to turn them into something they're not. You're much better off for yourself and for that person, because you're not doing them any favors by keeping them employed, because they're never going to grow. Again, the loyalty is very admirable, but you can't come at the expense of harming your business. So you got to get rid of them. And you're doing everybody a favor by doing that.
You're absolutely right.
It's, as painful as it is for some people, but the reality is, if you think about it in the context of everybody benefits by you not being here, including you, most importantly you, because you get an opportunity to go somewhere else where you can thrive.
For sure. All right. So we covered a lot here. We talked about the benefits of buying a business and the impact of buying a business can make in your growth. We've talked about how it's not just being able, what I call arbitrage, and Richard he has some other fancy word for it. What was it? What was that word?
Accretion.
I'm going to have to look that up. So, but
we're both saying the same thing. Yes.
Got it.
Correct.
So, you're automatically increasing the wealth of business. But then we talked about how when you're buying complementary type businesses where you share a common target market, all the different ways in which you can leverage that. You can buy for IP, you can buy it for clients, you can cross-pollinate, increase lifetime customer value. We talked about it's not only the 6 ways to increase the value of the business, but the 6 things that you can look at that ultimately decrease the value of the business. Unique advantage point, founder-led companies, having multiple different streams of revenue, high MRR. Ideally, you want 50% recurring and more. Churn rate needs to be below 5%. Retention, on the flip side, has to be above 95% monthly. We look at data intelligence and so forth, and that's a really, big component of it. And of course, we talked about everything in between, finishing up with the importance of having just a really high caliber team, bringing in those A players. Richard, people want to learn more about you, the work that you do, and so forth. Where do we send them?
Well, I have a bunch of different businesses. So the easiest way for people to remember is you can certainly email me at rp@richardparker.com or go to richardparker.com. I mean, in there, if anybody has any question, if I can help any of your listeners or whatever, again, like you're involved in a bunch of different things, feel free to contact me anytime. Happy to talk with them, help them out in any way, shape, or form.
And you have a bunch of resources and whatnot also on richardparker.com.
Correct. Yeah, we have a course that teaches people how to buy businesses. We've sold over 100,000 of these. We've helped, tens of thousands of people buy businesses. So that's the place you can find it. And separate and apart from that, if someone has a question related to the potential sale of their business or what have you, you could use the contact us form or whatever on there to get hold of me, and I'm happy to help.
Awesome. So there you go. You can also check them out at richardparker.com. And then for additional strategies, tips, and information to grow your company faster, more predictably, and less dependent on you, it's predictableprofits.com. Again, that is predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Godet with my friend Richard Parker, and I will see you in another episode.